It is my pleasure to address you the very same week that the people of Madrid, Barcelona, Zaragoza, Valencia, and other Spanish cities have started getting their dignity and their cities back. It has to be said that this is not only a success of Podemos. Podemos has been part of this huge achievement, but many other people have taken part as well, social movements, citizens in general, other parties. Many people have done a great deal to achieve this last Sunday. But the goal is to win the next general election. Sorry? Louder? Okay. The goal is to win the next general election in November, but this is far right now. This is something we have to achieve. The whole country is waiting for it, but we have to take it very seriously, and it's not easy at all. But there are good things, definitely good things going on in Spain right now. Well. The ideas I want to share with you are part of an open experience, of a work in progress, because good politics is always a work in progress. The starting point of whatever Podemos is doing in Spain is pretty clear. 1 year and a half ago, we thought that there was a new political space in Spain, not merely electoral, but political in general, and this space was there for the most basic agreements reached during the Spanish transition to democracy had been broken. But this political space was not either on the left side of the political board or the right side of the political board. It was at the heart of it. This connects to what happened in May 2011 in the squares of the cities of Madrid, Valencia, Barcelona, and many other places as well. The M15 movements, also known as the Indignados movement. The Podemos hypothesis, the idea of launching a party like Podemos, would be just impossible to think without this Indignados movement taking place. But it has to be said as well that Podemos is not the party of the Indignados, because I don't think that anyone can be the party of a thing like that. And Podemos is not the party of the social movements either, because there are connections, of course, social, political, historical, but no one can be the party of so many social movements, so many communities, so many people. I will outline 3 major shifts that the Indignados movement brought and that might help to explain what Podemos is and what Podemos is doing. First change. In May 2011, the traditional two-party system and the metaphors of the left and the right fell into disrepute. This doesn't mean that people didn't vote Labour or Conservative anymore. It means that the confidence was broken. Second shift, little by little, what was perceived as an individual problem, I mean, for instance, the risk of eviction, unemployment in the long term, political uneasiness in general, what was perceived as something individual became something common, somehow generational, somehow collective, and therefore it became political. And third shift, it's easy to connect indignation to a moralist, not political frame. But this indignation of the Indignados was not individual and was not moral. It created some sort of new popular culture. It created new images, new words, new songs, new ideas that created, as I said, this new common sense. They kind of created a new common sense. And whatever looked natural in the past, like, for instance, the Labour Conservative monopoly of two, didn't look natural anymore. Therefore, the balance of economic and political forces did not change, but a certain frame of common sense was definitely shaken. It was a regime crisis. But from this specific social situation, one cannot deduce one political subject, a very coherent, homogeneous political subject. What opened up, on the contrary, was the opportunity to articulate a process of political change, but this process of change cannot be deduced from the Indignados movement. There are no logical steps in politics. You have to make moves, you have to take risks, but things don't happen logically. And also we know in Europe that from the same situation, very different movements and political forces can emerge. So the challenge was to build up a social majority, to turn indignation into political change, but without mistaking two different realities. There were thousands of people in the square pointing at the crisis of capitalism and at the crisis of representative democracy, but also, there were millions at home watching TV, listening to the radio, feeling sympathy for the Indignados, but they were pointing at a different crisis, a crisis of a very specific representation, the parties that were representing them at that moment, and also they were very unhappy with austerity, but that didn't mean necessarily, at least, that they were anti-capitalist or something like that. We are talking about millions and millions of people at home watching TV and listening to the radio. So we wanted to bring somehow these two realities together, but without mistaking them. There are, how long can I? Yeah? Okay. The idea is, after this context I have tried to provide, I will outline very quickly two major ideas, two basic pillars of what Podemos is doing in Spain. The first one could be summarized as from great tales to practices. A regime crisis is also the crisis of the political narratives that give meaning to politics. In Spain, after the transition to democracy, the political narrative, the mainstream political narrative, said that what really mattered was to modernize the country, to leave Franco behind without asking too much, and to find a wider space for consensus. Everything was about consensus. Disagreeing with the specific rules of the Spanish political game, rules that marginalized very central aspects on discussions about the political, social, and economic model for the country, disagreeing with these specific rules was regarded as radical and anti-democratic. Whatever was to be worth any consideration had to be cast in the same mold. And democracy worked somehow like a cookie cutter. Everything outside the cutter was discarded. In order to confront this great tale of Spanish democracy as a success, we realized that we had to accept the good things that the Spanish transition to democracy brought, but also that we had to explain everyone that we needed to rethink and reactivate democracy in order to listen to those demands that the current political system couldn't listen because they didn't fit the mold. If Spanish democracy lacked something, that was participation, transparency, accountability, and openness, none of which are traditional left-wing demands. But we said, okay, who cares? Many people have been asking for this. Why don't ride that wave? Because who is against, transparency or accountability? Almost no one. And this displacement can be summarized, or basic pillar can be summarized as follows. Sometimes how you do things is more important than what you do. So we are saying things that might not sound very radical, but because they are the outcomes of a very different procedure, very transparent, we try to be very horizontal in terms of decision making, because they are part of this democratic procedure, they get somehow radicalized. They are more radical because of the how and not because of the what we say. And this is important. And the second pillar, and this is some very usually controversial, Another displacement, very basic, was from the left-right, thank you, from the left-right split to the social majorities. Okay, so after the European election in May 2014, we found ourselves in an open, not fixed, very diffuse, anti-establishment atmosphere in Spain. And this diffuse feeling made possible to articulate a social majority happy to vote for change. And we thought and we think that relying on this majority, a new government is possible. But the road is not exactly from the streets to the ballot box. There are a lot of ambiguities and a lot of constraints that need to be considered. We think, and we thought then, that the European left needs to understand that processes of change in general, and this particular process of change, belongs to no one. The left is necessary to change a country, but it's not the subject of change. And it's never going to be the only subject of change. And this really matters. Also, activists and militants, and I'm an activist myself, matter a lot, and they are a huge source of inspiration. But you know, activists and militants do not change countries either. It's the people. It's the people. And this is very important for us. Does this mean that Podemos has no ideology at all? No, it's not like that. It's not about you know, running away from ideology. But it's true that an open process must bring different positions together. For instance, in Podemos, there are a lot of Spanish people living abroad, former labor voters that never voted communist in the past, people with a strong activist identity, people who don't have any previous experience, very different people. And it's not about making them think like us. It's not about making them look like us. It's not about making them be like us. It's about articulating a political change in which ideology matters less than building this new social majority. And what does a social majority do? What is a social majority? Thank you. A social majority has to do with building a new common sense. This is something that really matters to us too. Summarizing, what Podemos comes up with and what's at the core of what Podemos does and how it does is a combination of democratic methodology and some transversal new common sense agreements that follow, that you know, sound like this. First, new common sense agreement. Corruption, which is a major issue in Spain, as it is in other countries in Europe and the rest of the world, corruption must be understood as a kidnapping of democracy. If corruption is the system, it's not the rotten apple of the system, but the system itself, then democracy is not possible. Then democracy is not possible. Second, new common sense agreement. Austerity must be defined and reconsidered in terms of democracy. If we cannot choose the economic model we want to live with, then democracy is being kidnapped. And third, new common sense agreement. Popular sovereignty and sovereignty in general, as a whole, must be defined and reconsidered in terms of democracy. If those who rule do not stand in elections, then democracy is being kidnapped by savage powers beyond any law and any constitution. And many people agree with us in this, you know, agree with this new common sense agreements, but they don't necessarily come from the left. They come from various different places. We want these basic agreements to strengthen a new social majority able and ready and happy to change the country. This includes elections, and winning the election is the main goal, but it also means the common sense and the everyday life politics that make changes possible in the long term. So, thank you.